Welcome to the Writer's Nook. I'm Trudy Krisher. I'll be your host for the next half hour. And the mission of the Writer's Nook is to bring you, the viewer, some interesting conversations about writing, reading, literacy, and the love of the written word. So we hope you will enjoy today's show. I'm delighted to introduce you to my guest, a talented young man by the name of Ryan Ireland, who has a first novel out, and you look like my paper boy, Ryan. How you could be old enough to write a novel, I'll have to, but you have written a wonderful book that I've enjoyed very much called Beyond the Horizon. And I'd like you to tell readers a little bit about Beyond the Horizon.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here.
Delighted.
It's very exciting. Beyond the Horizon is a Western set in the 1840s. And the story begins with a man living out on the Great Plains, and he's kind of eking out a living, and there's a woman living with him who is not his wife. She's with child, and one day a stranger shows up. This is the beginning point of the story. And the stranger tricks the man into leaving, and after the man leaves, he kills the woman and sets off in pursuit of the man. And from there, a chain of events unfolds. All of them very unfortunate.
Very unfortunate. It's a dark, dark story. It really is. One of the things that I wanted to suggest to readers is, first off, you have a great literary talent. This is an unusual story. This is not your father's Western, okay? The Western is sort of a familiar genre to people, you know, the wide open spaces and the outlaws and the chase, you know, and the violence and all that. But this is a little bit different. So people that are expecting Louis L'Amour or something like that are not going to be getting that in this book. It's a different kind of Western. How so? How is your book different?
Well, you know, I kind of started with the idea that I've always loved Westerns. Let me start, you know, you mentioned your father's Western. My dad watched lots of Westerns growing up.
Like what?
John Wayne mostly.
Oh,
it wasn't until much later that I discovered Clint Eastwood, you know, which is the other side of that coin.
Sure.
And when I discovered Clint Eastwood and that kind of gritty anti-hero,
yeah,
I really fell in love with Westerns. Before that, you know, Westerns were neat. You know, we went on vacations and we saw some of the locales.
Like,
you know,
what? Where did you go? I mean, because it's so clear that you know the Western environment.
Well, I was very, very privileged growing up. My dad had a good job. He could take off several weeks during the summer when we had a camper.
Good.
And we would drive around out west for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time and visit a lot of the national parks, Monument Valley, Arizona, Grand Canyon, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah. Later, my sister moved out to Utah, Salt Lake City, and so I would go out and visit her. And so I became very familiar with the landscape. It almost feels like it's kind of where I grew up. I just remember really formative experiences from my childhood happening in the West. And so, you know, I had that firsthand experience, but then I also saw Dad watching these Westerns. And I knew that I've always been attracted to the Western as a story. I like the themes that are prevalent in Westerns, but I also know that it can be a tired genre sometimes. You know, some of the things have been done. And I was looking to do something different. I wanted to take as many of the tropes that are common in Westerns, and I wanted to just subvert them every chance that I get. You know, the showdown. I wanted the showdown to become a point of where things fall flat instead of the climax in the book. I wanted the Indian to actually be in a more of a redemption role, I guess. I wanted us to see the cowboy as kind of this blundering fool instead of, you know, this John Wayne
hair on your chest kind of guy.
Yeah, and so it was kind of and one of the most prominent things in the book, or not prominent, is the lack of firearms. You know, in the Old West, most people did not have, you know, a sidearm. They didn't carry a pistol. They didn't have guns. And so I made it a point in this book for most of the killing to be done in a very gritty and graphic way, because that is actually, historically, there wasn't a whole lot of showdowns in the dusty street at noon.
No high noons or anything like that, where the gunslinger pulling your trigger really quick. So that's good. That's interesting that you tried to change that perception and be a little more accurate.
Yeah, accurate, and at the same time do something different and a little out there at times.
Well, one of the things I think is so interesting about this book, this is a very literary book, and I would think that it would be challenging. You know, nowadays, if they can't figure out what genre you are, you know, they're totally scratching their head. They need to know where to put you on the bookshelf. And I think there are a lot of places where this could go. You'll have to let me know. I'm thinking Western Gothic, you know, anti-Western, literary fiction, trade fiction. I mean, where do you see it fitting on this shelf? Of course, you don't make those decisions.
No,
I know.
thankfully, I don't.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. The few bookstores that I've gone to, you know, I ask where in the store is this going to be located, and it's always different.
Yeah.
You know, obviously there's the new book display, but then after that they've got to put it somewhere. So there's, you know, the Western shelf, the literary fiction shelf. You know, if I had to classify myself, I guess I would put it in that Western Gothic. I like still being in the tradition of the Western and letting people know that I'm doing something a little different.
Very good. Interesting answer. Now, I want to say couple other things.
Okay.
For someone, you know, with a first book, this is an impressive debut. There are things that I noticed that reminded me of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the magical realism, you know, style that he uses. I'm not saying you're going to get the Nobel Prize, but I'm saying that's a tough thing to do. I was reminded of Cormac McCarthy, the way he plays with time and space. So there were some very sophisticated literary techniques that I thought you brought to this story. Were you intentionally trying to do that, or tell me a little bit about your imagination, your imaginative process, where all that comes in.
Okay, well, as I'm writing the book, I get through the first chapter. Originally, there was not supposed to be any element of magical realism.
Okay.
It was going to be an old-fashioned go-get-'em cowboy
Okay.
chase. And I go, well, I'm going to subvert some things, and you know, and I didn't plan on the stranger character being able to walk through time faster than the man. As I've come to term it, walking through time. It just kind of happened because I got bored with the writing.
Okay.
I wrote the first chapter and I said, I've got to do something here in order to keep myself interested.
Yeah. Okay.
I never intended for it to get published. And so I thought, well, let's, you know, go ahead. If I keep myself entertained, one person at least is entertained. So I added in this stranger. I said, well, let's make him so he can walk through time faster. That'll add something in there.
That did.
And then the rest just kind of kept falling into place.
Yeah.
You know, thank you for the comparison to Marquez. I don't know what to do with that.
Well, I don't know what to do with it either, but, you know, get your autograph, I suppose, in hopes that later on it'll be worth a lot of money. How's that sound?
Sure.
How about reading us a little bit from the book?
Sure, I'd love to.
So that readers can get a sense, viewers can get a sense of what it sounds like.
Yeah, and actually I selected a passage near the end of the book. There's no spoilers, but I chose a conversation between a stranger and an old-timer in a bar at the very end of the book. And
I remember that.
It's kind of indicative of the entire book.
All right.
So here it is. The stranger picked up his mug and drank, wiping a dribble from his lip. History is only half the equation, he said. You have to add science. For a second time that evening, he drew an arched pathway in the air before him. Someday we will send men into the heavens, and they will look down on us living like ants. They'll circle the earth at a league per second, hurtling through a cold darkness without parallel. And when those men return, they will not have lived the same life as those who stayed here. They will have actually aged slower. They will be a little bit younger than their brethren. If I were to spend my life making these journeys, going between heaven and earth, I would live forever, knowing everything. The old-timer's shoulders shook with stifled laughter. Men living in the stars that never age. For a second you had me nearly believe in it. He wagged his finger at the stranger. I can prove it to you, the stranger said. The old-timer rolled his eyes, said he would like to hear this. He leaned forward and rested his chin on clasped hands. The stranger's voice brokered no guile. When I sat down here, I added and subtracted, postulated and theorized. I did all the fool things a man of science does. I've had enough time to think it over, and I realized tonight that I would meet you, and tonight I would kill you.
Wow. That's pretty powerful. Now, that ends on, I will kill you. Now, I want to say there may not be any guns in this story, but it is very brutal. It is very violent, and the violence comes in as a sort of a surprise. It's very swift, it's horrific, sometimes it's unexpected. I was thinking of that phrase from Tennyson, In Memoriam, nature is red in tooth and claw, and suddenly, we're reading, we're traversing the West, and then suddenly there's this horribly brutal scene that takes place. What was the purpose of that?
I think I wanted the story to play out like an allegory of the creation of America.
Oh my gosh, that's one of my questions. That's one of my questions. This seems like an allegory in a way.
Well, and I was intentionally going for that allegorical feel to it. And part of what I wanted to examine is the way that violence played into the creation of our country, into any country, any civilization, kind of the uncivilized things we do in order to establish
a civilization.
And a lot of the violence here was, I wanted to put it in readers' faces because I think that we've developed as a society to the point where we outsource violence. Violence occurs outside of our borders. We export things like warfare, and we don't actually see it here. And so I wanted that to be very visceral, and I wanted the readers to have to confront the idea that, this great American narrative is actually born in blood.
Well, it's interesting because I thought that there's this allegorical quality because you never give a character a name. It's always the stranger, the Indian, the commandante. I mean, they have these, symbolic names or allegorical names as they make their pilgrim's progress, in a way, across the West. And, I just found that fascinating. I felt like you were saying something about the nature of progress and the establishment of civilization. So it's an undercurrent in a way. It doesn't grab you by the neck. But I was glad to hear you say that because that was the sense I was getting.
Yeah, progress. Progress can be a good thing, but progress, it can also be a thing that drags us away from our humanity, and we don't realize that we're becoming separated from ourselves as human. And sometimes it takes that jolt of violence to realize, oh my gosh, this is something that's actually happened, or this has happened, and it takes blood, in this case on the page, thankfully, but oftentimes in real life, before we realize we've become separated. There's this degree of separation between who we think we are and what we actually are. Interesting.
Okay. Ruth Ann Peck, who is our producer, she started a tradition with the show. She would find a quote that seemed to sum up what the book seemed to be saying, and I found one from Thomas Hobbes that I thought had some bearing on your book. Thomas Hobbes said, "The life of man is, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." Do you think that describes your book in any way?
Yeah. I wish my book were a little bit longer, but yeah, it is kind of short. I
he didn't say short novel. It's not as soon as a short novel, but that life is short, brutal.
And for many of the characters in this book, that actually very well sums up their lives. Making a living in the Old West was not. It's not the family in Shane, building a perfect log cabin and wearing the long flowing dresses. It is, trying to make a hard scrabble life out of nothing and then being disappointed by it and then having it cut short.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, in your acknowledgments to the book, you talk about the importance of your experiences at Wright State. And I think they were somewhat formative in the development of this novel. Is that true, or can you speak to that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The folks at Wright State are just tremendous. The faculty there, I wrote a failed novel. It'll never see the light of day. I think
we understand.
every writer has that.
Yep.
Yeah. And they were the staff up there, the faculty, Dr. Flanagan, Scott Geisel, were very patient and very good about giving writing direction. So it wasn't this prescriptive, okay, well, you're doing this, this, and this wrong. Instead, what I got was, you're heading in this direction and we think it's promising. Why don't you just keep going that way? And that was the type of thing that I needed. And so by the time I got finished with that first novel, I kind of hit my stride. And immediately after that, I began to write Beyond the Horizon. And I had also started in the master's program, so I had the good fortune of working with Dr. Flanagan another time.
Good.
And she actually saw the very first drafts of this book, or the early chapters of the book, and she said, "You're heading in the right direction."
Okay, you know, and that's so encouraging.
It really is, especially after so many years of working and getting feedback. I knew exactly what she meant. So.
Good. So you've had good training at Wright State.
Absolutely. And the poetry professor there, he's since retired, Gary Pacernick.
Oh, I know him.
Yes,
yeah, I know Gary.
He's a great guy. I was the accidental poetry guy. I was working a job. It was 5 days a week, and poetry was offered Tuesday, Thursday.
So there you go.
And fiction writing was Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I ended up taking a lot of poetry classes as an undergrad, and I'm glad I did. It really informed my writing. I learned how words function on an individual level. I learned how to, what word enjambment does, the effect of certain types of punctuation or the lack of, as people might be able to tell in my book. I eschew a lot of the of punctuation.
It doesn't bother me, by the way. I'm an old English teacher. It should bother me, but it doesn't. If it's done well, it doesn't bother you.
As long as there's a system, and that's something that I learned from Gary. The poetry was so. It informed my fiction writing so much. It's almost like something that I would not be able to do what I do with language without having what Gary was able to teach me. Yeah. So no, all the folks at Wright State are just tremendous. I owe them a great debt.
Very good. I wanted to ask you a little bit. There was a hint in your bio that you have been quite an advocate for public libraries, and I wanted you to talk about that a little bit. What's been your involvement with public libraries, and what's the importance of that?
Well, from a young age, my mom took me to the public library. She worked in a public library at one point. She was an English teacher.
Yes, yay, Mom. We got to give a hand to the moms for things like that. Yes.
My mom is a tremendous lady, and so as I got older, I graduated with a degree in poetry. What am I going to do with this? There was an opening at the public library, and since then I applied and was hired in as their community information associate. And I've worked my way up, and I'm now the publicity and marketing officer for the public library.
Good.
And there is not a better job in the world than doing publicity for public libraries. Publicists, sometimes you don't know if they're telling you the truth or not. They've kind of got that reputation. When you do publicity for a public library, all you have to do is tell the truth. Yeah. Public libraries are doing great things for everybody. You walk in the door, you can be served. It doesn't matter where you come from, how much you earn, or anything. It's you walk in the door, and it's a library for you. I've been extremely blessed to work for the Greene County Public Library, and they are doing exciting things all the time for youth.
What are some campaigns you've worked on? What are some?
I'll tell you about the big one right now that's ongoing.
Shout out.
Yes, it's the Dolly Parton Imagination Library Program, and it started in Sevierville, Tennessee, and Dolly Parton herself started it. And the program puts a book directly in the hands of a child once a month from ages 0 to 5. There are no socioeconomic requirements. There's nothing else other than age 0 to 5. So. You just sign child up. It's absolutely free.
Oh, that is wonderful.
And it funds, and the program is funded through private donations. And children receive a book every month in the mail that they get to keep. And so, it was interesting. I went to the Dolly Parton conference not long ago.
Oh, how fun! As a librarian, you went to the Dolly Parton conference.
Yes, it was.
It sounds like
great.
A ball.
It really was. And
Thank you.
They did a great job. First of all, explaining the program and how we explain it to other people. But then they also said, well, people often ask about the measurable results.
Sure.
What does putting a book into the hands of a child once a month from ages 0 to 5 do? And the results are tremendous. They had scholars and academics there who've actually run studies, statistical studies, and the improvement is about 15%
Isn't that
kindergarten
amazing?
readiness.
Yes. Let's do it.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
Let's
it's
hear
an
it for
awesome
public
program.
libraries and
Yes.
reading and getting kids started. And what a wonderful way to spend your time when you're not writing.
Yeah.
To be able to do those kinds of things.
My life is full of books, and I couldn't imagine a better life.
That's great. Yeah. That's wonderful to hear. I'm sure you're working on something else. Just in the last couple minutes we have, tell us a little bit about what's next for Ryan Ireland.
Beyond the Horizon was part of a 2-book deal with One World. So I do have a second book coming out in March. It might be moved back. This book got moved back about a month. So sometime in the spring, and it's called Ghost of the Desert, and it's about an anthropologist who goes out and studies ghost towns. It's set in the 1970s, and while he's out studying a ghost town in southern Utah, he is abducted by a family of outcasts who kind of lives in this ghost town. And in the process of being abducted, he ends up developing Stockholm Syndrome and kind of has to deal with his own sordid past.
Very good. So sordid past will be in this story, and the West, and we have a lot to look forward to, Ryan. This was a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you.
I wish you good luck. I think you have a lot of talent, and you've accomplished a lot and at this point. So you make sure that you keep us posted on the Writer's Nook about what your latest works are. I do have to ask you one last thing, and that is, I understand you're a father of 3.
Yes.
How do you keep this whole thing going? Because people are going to wonder about that.
How do I find the time to write?
Do your job, raise the kids. I mean, it's hard.
They're my stepkids. I married and had instant family, which is a wonderful thing.
That can be challenging, though.
It really focused me. Before that, when you're a bachelor and you've got your own apartment and all the time in the world, no writing gets done. I mean, you spend a lot of time saying that you're going to write. You have kids in the house and you go, 4:30 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. is my time. I'm going to write. And they focus me, and I look at them and I want to do something that they can go, yeah, my dad does this. My dad created this. And I didn't have that motivation always. I didn't have somebody that I knew was looking at what I was doing and developing their own goals modeled on that. So I've become a little more conscientious and more thoughtful about my time as well.
And most writers need to learn that lesson, because it's so easy to daydream about what you think you're going to do, and it's another thing to put your seat in the chair and actually do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, it's been my pleasure having you today on the Writer's Nook. I hope that you'll tune in every I want to say every week. We're on every week, but we have writers about every 2 months. I hope that you'll join us the next time on the Writer's Nook. If you have suggestions for a program, or there's someone that you'd like to see as a guest, I hope you'll contact me at www.trudykrisherauthor.com. And thank you so much for joining us today on the Writer's Nook. And thanks to Ryan Ireland.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ryan.